make a start. Good morning everyone, and welcome to this webinar on thinking and speaking off the cuff. I personally believe that your ability to respond to questions, to speak to someone off the cuff is one of the best skills you'll ever have, and it's a real life skill. You never know when you're at a networking meeting or somewhere down the street, or your boss grabs you by the collar and brings you into the office and says, can you quickly update me on this project? What's your point of view on this? And those circumstances, you can't say, do you mind if I have a couple of days, go away, put my PowerPoint slides together, work out my beginning and work out my main points and what my take-home message is. You can't do that. So thinking and speaking off the cuff is a real skill that you use in everyday life, whether it's the job interview, the networking around at some social function or some party, the special occasion speech where someone might ask you to respond. Thinking and speaking off the cuff, a real life skill. So today, if everything worked out perfectly for me, each of you would go away with 2 or 3 pieces of information that you can use the next time you are put on the spot, the next time you find yourself having to respond with little notice. Good morning everyone, and Peter Dew's my name, and I'm a public speaking trainer and coach, and my passion, my absolute purpose in life is helping people have the confidence and the skills so that they can effectively put their point of view across, because there's so many people out there that have got something to say, they want to contribute, and they sometimes don't because they lack confidence or they lack the effectiveness of putting their point of view across. So that's my absolute passion. Please feel free to send me feedback at the end of this webinar. You've got my website and my email there on the screen. Most of you know me, but I notice a few names coming in. As a public speaking trainer and coach, my background is a person who stutters and avoiding public speaking. So I know what it's like to live with a fear, with an inability to speak or get your point of view across. I know what it's like to not be able to perform at job interviews and get overlooked because my verbal communication skills are considered unsuitable for most jobs. But I've moved on from that, and I've started speaking and really attacking my problem about 10 years ago, and for the last 4 years I've been turning this into my business. So that's a little bit about me. So we mentioned thinking and speaking off the cuff. It's a really wonderful, powerful skill that enables you to do a lot of things. Have the confidence to speak at meetings and put your point of view across. How the webinar goes, and I have touched on this a bit earlier on, put your hand up if you want to ask a question through the microphone, or at any stage type a question into your little question box, the dialogue box, and I will see that question and I'll be able to answer it as we go, or I'll be able to park it until that part of the webinar where I may be more appropriate to address it. Okay. Why learn to think and speak off the cuff? The power of speaking off the cuff is that it gives you great credibility. The credibility that when you speak, you seem to be concise, you seem to be effective, you seem to have a logical point of view. It also gives you reliability. You'll become the go-to person. Peter always has something to say that makes sense. He always had a good way of looking at it. He can always see, the trees for the forest. It makes you reliable because people see that you are confident, effective, and able to respond off the cuff at meetings, in everyday conversations. And of course, along with that, you then get the confidence. Because you're good at speaking off the cuff, you now have the confidence to put your voice forward, to say something, to contribute, because you know that you've got these wonderful skills, structures, and you can speak off the cuff. And of course, finally, it helps you build those relationships. This is the networking relationships. This is your elevator pitch. This is when you meet someone and they're impressed by what you say. And it's not just about talking about yourself, but it's about building relationships, because you've got good icebreakers, good elevator speech, and you can respond quickly. So that's the power of speaking off the cuff. Great credibility. You're seen as being reliable. You yourself gain confidence, and it helps you connect with those relationships that may help you in your business and your everyday life. That is the power of public speaking. 3 secrets that I'm going to share with you today for thinking and speaking off the cuff. 3 simple secrets, and some of them aren't all that secret. So it may not be appropriate to call them secret, but 3 steps that I would recommend that you consider to prepare you for thinking and speaking off the cuff. The first one is preparation. And I know that this is a little bit of an oxymoron, a little bit of a contradiction. You're given no notice, and Peter, you're telling us to prepare. Indeed, preparation is the foundation of thinking and speaking off the cuff. Really, you need to know the topic in which you speak. So know your material really well. It's extremely rare, it's very unlikely that you're going to be asked to speak on something intelligently on which you know nothing. In the workplace, for someone to ask you to speak on something which you know nothing is not a real life scenario. So if you know your topic, if you know your area really well, then you'll be across most issues. For a job interview, you know what the selection criteria, what the job description is, what the position data form is. You know what the requirements are. So you can study, you can prepare, you can get ready before you go into that job interview. Yes, you don't know what questions they're going to ask you, but you can be prepared. So know your topic is the first level of preparation. Second thing you can do, anticipate those difficult questions, contentious issues. If you're talking about dropping funding, reducing staff, putting a project in mothballs, if you're talking about an adverse event, you know there's going to be difficult questions. You know there's going to be some knockers in the room. There's going to be some people that are not happy. Put yourself in their shoes. What questions would they ask you? And of course, what's the one question you don't want to be asked? What's the question that would really make you struggle? Prepare an answer for that, because someone will ask that question. So when you go into that situation, you're not completely caught without having an answer. You're not caught off guard completely. So do your preparation. When you go to meetings, you know there's minutes and there's an agenda. Read the agenda, read the minutes. If in the minutes you were meant to do some research and report back, then you know that you're probably going to be asked, and how are you going on that project? So don't be surprised at a meeting when someone throws you a question that may not be on the agenda, but it's in the previous minutes. Or know your agenda. If on the agenda it's introductions to new members, you know you're going to have to stand up and do your elevator pitch or your 60-second introduction speech. Maybe you don't have to stand up. Maybe you're just around the table, but don't be surprised. Or project updates. Don't be surprised when you're asked to update your project. Stay across recent issues, newspapers, journal articles, scan the environment, be aware of what's happening around you. All of these things will help you prepare. And even with the preparation, and I did say know your topic, if you are asked something of which you know nothing, you don't have to respond. You can find out and get back. Our parliamentarians have a thing and it's called questions on notice. If a member of parliament asks in parliament a question of another member or a question of a minister and the minister does not have the answer, even if it's in his portfolio or her portfolio, the minister can say, I will take that question on notice and they'll get back to you in 72 hours. So it's about preparation. Another area where I got caught out was I was a witness in a motor vehicle accident. And 2 years after I witnessed the accident and gave the police my statement, I was in court as a witness for the prosecution. The defence lawyer asked me as many left field, narrow niche questions as possible, and I struggled to answer them. I did not read my statement. I did not go back to the scene of the accident because for me it was just black and white. I saw the guy hit the car and he drove off. But I didn't do my preparation. And the prosecuting counsel probably should have said to me, Peter, I want you to go over everything in your statement. I want you to review the site of accident. So do your preparation. You can prepare. As I said, it's very unlikely that you will be asked to speak on something of which you know nothing. The other week I was working at one of the shires, and one of the workers is also president of the local football club, and he was doing an address to the players, and he was speaking about the doubling of their football registration fees. So it used to cost them $150 a year, and they're now having to pay $300 a year. Of course, the players are not happy, and they say to him, you know, why have our fees, why have our match fees, why have our club fees doubled? And his response was quite simple, because we've got this new Butte insurance policy that protects you if you become a quadriplegic on the football field or anything else happens if you die on the football field. It's a really great new policy. And someone asked him a question, can you tell us what's in the policy? And he couldn't. He didn't bring it with him. Although he'd briefly read it, he didn't take any notes. And that was a light bulb moment for him, because he said to me at start, Peter, that's rubbish. You can't prepare for off-the-cuff speaking. And then he came back to me and said, after lunch, and said, I've just realised I should have prepared for that meeting, for that football meeting. I'm the president, and when those questions came, I should have known the answers. I should have had that material at my fingertips. So the first rule, preparation. If you don't believe me, Winston Churchill, I'm just preparing my impromptu remarks. Mark Twain, it usually takes me more than 3 weeks to prepare a good impromptu speech. And Ruth Gordon, the very best impromptu speeches are the ones written in advance. Do your preparation. If you do get caught out and you don't know the answer, and you should, well then you won't get caught out the next time. Another thing with off-the-cuff speaking is you need to buy time. It is a situation, and the audience understands this, that you've been put in the hot seat. The job interview panel understands that it's quite stressful responding to questions. So you don't have to start speaking straight away. Please pause and breathe before you speak. Use some filler statements. That's a really good question. There's a number of ways I could answer that question. Just something to buy that little bit of time. Paraphrase the question. So if I understand you, you're asking me what my point of view is on the future of nuclear energy in Australia. And in paraphrasing the question, You're also seeking clarity, because if the person who's asked you the question shakes their head from side to side, you know you've misheard the question. So paraphrase the question, paraphrase the task. So what you want me to do is to do such and such. In that time, you've just got those few seconds to gather your thoughts. So do take your time. I mentioned our parliamentarians. They take 72 hours for a question on notice. Obviously you can't do that when you're put on the spot, but you can take your time. What I see sometimes is people, they start to speak, they fire from the hip straight away, the foot goes in their mouth, and as they're speaking they realise that there's another way they could have answered this question, but because they've already started down this way, they're kind of stuck, especially with your yes, no responses. If someone asks you something and you say, look, no, I don't agree with that, and then as you start to unpack, you realise, well, maybe I can move my position a little bit. Once you've said no or yes, or you've started down a defined path, it's really hard to soften your answer, soften your response, or even change your direction. So do buy yourself a little bit of time. I know at council meetings, often when people respond to questions, they move from their seat, they stand up and they move to the microphone. That is time. That's buying a little bit of time. Work out your own way so that when you are asked the question off the cuff, you have a way of buying a bit of time. No one in that stressful situation expects you to respond immediately and eloquently with a powerfully crafted opening statement. You are allowed to buy a little bit of time. The third secret, the third thing that will help you is have a structure. If you have a structure that you apply every time you speak off the cuff, you'll have this sort of formula, and the formula will allow you to buy time, identify your thoughts, and give them a good response. I'm going to go into structure for the rest of the webinar and some tips for helping you put the structure together. I'm going to pause for a moment. Put your hand up and I'll open up your microphone, or type in a question. Okay. No questions at this stage. So the structure I use, it's called the RISE model, and it's really quite a simple model. Resist time pressure. So this is the buying the time. Identify your point of view or your logic or your strategy for answering. Use a mini speech structure. What a lot of people do with their presentations off the cuff is they don't use a structure and they just talk. They just say stuff and then they stop talking. So your mini structure, for those of you who do Toastmasters or have done any public speaking training, and most people, even if you haven't done public speaking training, know the beginning, the middle and the end. The opening, the body, the conclusion. That's generally how we write. So your structure of your off-the-cuff speech should be the same. And in the public speaking arena, we generally talk about the 3 T's of public speaking. The first T stands for tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell your audience what you're going to tell them. That's the first T. The second T is tell them. And the third T is tell them what you told them. Tell your audience what you told them. It's just beginning, middle and end. So I've been asked to give my view on nuclear energy. So I've just told you what I'm going to tell you. My view on nuclear energy is that I think it's a little bit risky at the moment. We've heard of some nuclear disasters from the big tsunami in Japan, and we know that nuclear waste is quite a problem. So my view is I don't think Australia should consider nuclear energy at the moment. That's my final T. Which brings me to the end strongly. Off the cuff speaking, job interviews, when your boss asks your opinion, this is not the time to sit on the fence. As I said, I sometimes hear people speak and they say stuff and then they just stop talking, and I'm not sure what their point of view is. So please do put in a mini structure. For example, if I go back to the nuclear energy example, if I was to say, well, my view on nuclear energy is that I know lots of things about nuclear energy. First of all, I know that Australia's got lots of uranium. I know that it's cheap. I also know that it's greenhouse gas friendly. And I also know that nuclear energy is quite dangerous. And I stop speaking. None of you have an idea of what my view is. I've just said stuff and stopped speaking. I've said two things that support nuclear energy, and I've also said that it's dangerous. After you've said your stuff, you need to go back and end and say what your position is. So on the basis of that, I think the risks, the difficulties, the problems far outweigh any advantages of cheapness and availability. So I'm going to say I don't support nuclear energy. Then you stop speaking. The other thing I see people do sometimes is they use a bit of a structure and they end strongly. So I don't think Australia should support nuclear energy at all. And then they remember another point. And by the way, the quality of uranium in Australia is some of the highest in the world. Really, really good stuff. So now I've just confused you. I'm against nuclear energy. Now I've just threw in another point. If, as you're unpacking your response to a question, and you do sum up and you remember another point, feel free to bring that point in. But once you bring that extra point in, you must go back and end strongly again. So still on the basis of that, my view is that I don't think Australia should consider nuclear energy. Buy yourself time. Don't fire from the hip too soon. Don't put your foot in your mouth and then realise there's nowhere to go. So take your time. While you're doing that, identify your point of view. A couple of things will come to mind straight away. Put those points into a structure. If you use that structure and tell us what you're going to tell them, some of that is paraphrasing, some of that in your introduction you haven't given us a point of view yet, some of that introduction is buying time. Then as you give us your points, maybe another point will come into mind and you can then weave that in. And then at the balance, at the end strongly. Do not sit on the fence. That's the simple RISE model structure for thinking and speaking off the cuff. I'm going to take you one step further. How do you identify your logic? You might say, well, that's great. I know lots about that area, but when I get asked a specific point, I don't know how to distill it. Or I haven't been asked that question before. I do know something about it, but how do I distill it? I'm going to move into some 9 models. I'm just going to pause a moment. See if there's any questions. Okay. These are the 9 backup models. These models layer on the RISE model. These 9 models are what helps you identify your point of view. So you're still going to resist time pressure, you're going to identify your point of view. Then you're going to put it into the structure, then you're going to end strongly. What if you're not quite sure what's your point of view? I'm going to go through these models one at a time. So what I know. It's easy. If you know something, if you've got experience, then go straight to that. From my experience, so you've asked what my view is on shedding 2 part-time staff so that we can bring ourselves back on budget. Well, from what I know, the last time we tried that, the service delivery was so compromised, the negative publicity that we got caused us huge problems. So from my experience, I would not recommend that you shed 2 part-time staff as a way of bringing us back on budget. Quite happy to work with you at looking at other ways of bringing our budget back on track, but I need to end strongly now because I've just added another bit of information. But I would urge you not to shed 2 part-time staff to bring us back on budget. It's quite simple. If you know something about it, you can go straight into it. That's backup model number 1. Backup model number 2. This prep method was made famous by Jennifer Hawkins when she won Miss Universe, and she used it all through the heats. The Miss Universe questions are quite obscure, sometimes world peace. If you had a magazine named after you, what would that magazine be? If you could be on the front cover of a magazine, which magazine would that be and why? If you win Miss World, what will you do? How will you change the world? Those really flowery questions. State your point of view, give a bit of a reason for your point of view, do an explanation, and then restate your point of view. So my point of view is that I don't support nuclear energy, and my reasons are I don't think it's all that safe. Let me explain. We know that 25 years ago there was the nuclear disaster which happened in Ukraine, Chernobyl. We also know that just over 12 months ago there was another nuclear accident with the Fukushima plant in Japan. We also know there's nuclear waste that we don't know what to do with it. So I don't think it's safe. And my point of view is that I don't think Australia should consider nuclear energy at the moment. State your point of view. You can merge your reasons and explanation into one if you want to, and then but sum up with your point of view. That is backup model number 2, to help you identify your point of view. Past, present, future. That could be yesterday, today, tomorrow. That could be this morning we did it this way. At the moment we're going to do it this way. And this afternoon we're going to do it this way. This morning I'm going to talk about this. Then at lunchtime I'm going to talk about this topic, and then this afternoon I'm going to talk about the other topic. In the past, 20, 30 years ago, nuclear energy was seen as the way forward for Australia in generating our electricity. There was fears that oil was going to run out and, you know, our coal supplies were dwindling. So about 20 years ago, nuclear energy was hot on the list of ways forward. At the moment, there's a lot of controversy around nuclear energy, and I don't think that many Australians support nuclear energy, and I think the reasons are around, you know, the risk, those things I've already spoken about. In the future, but that could be 10, 20 years ago, in the future, it could be that nuclear energy comes back onto the agenda in a strong way, but I think that'll be around when we learn to harness the nuclear waste and turn it into a neutral product. Past, present, future. Three things. This is a good model when you've got lots of information and you don't want to become too verbose, too stretched out in your response. You can start by saying, well, there's 3 things I know about nuclear energy, or there's 3 things I know about if we were to shed part-time staff. Number 1, there's going to be some negative publicity. Number 2, our ability to respond to our clients' needs is really going to drop, and number three, staff morale is going to be impacted in a negative way. So on the basis of those three things, I don't think we should shed part-time staff as a way of saving money. Be careful with the three things. There's a wonderful YouTube video, and it was Rick Perry was one of the Republican nominations or candidates for the Republican candidate. He was well regarded. The YouTube clip shows a debate, and he said there's three agencies of government that I would get rid of if I became President of the United States. The first one is commerce. The second one is education. The third one is, and he had his blank. And this was in front of the press and broadcast to the whole of the United States. And so the press said to him, you can't remember the third thing. And he flicked through his notes and he said, sorry. That was the end of his his race for the Republican candidate. Three things. If you come up with three things, if you start by saying the three things I know, if that's the way you identify your logic, then just make sure you've got enough information. And once again, once you've said the three things, you need to go back and end strongly. So had he said the third, had Rick Perry found the third agency of government, he then would have summed up by saying, so I think those three agencies of government cost a lot of money and don't provide a lot of value, so I would get rid of those three agencies of government. Because he couldn't remember the third thing, he was left with nowhere to go. Three things. Okay. Are there any questions at this stage on those models? Just type in the question box or put your hand up. Okay. Thanks for that. Thanks for that. I've just had a comment saying that the examples are helpful. Backup model number 5, pros and cons, positives, negatives, advantages, disadvantages. This one is really a no-brainer. So someone asked your point of view. Look, we've got a bit of a budget crisis at the moment. You know, you're director of one of the branches. What's your view on shedding a couple of part-time staff? You can do the pros and cons. Pros and cons is really good when you know a lot of information, but you don't have an opinion on it as yet. I'm thinking about buying a new car. My old car's just died. Would you advise me I get a good second-hand car, or should I just buy a brand new car? What would you advise me? How would you come to that advice? Most of us have cars. Most of us have got experiences. Some of you might go straight to, well, what I know is that when you buy a second-hand car, it's likely to fall to bits on you, so I would never buy a second-hand car because from my experience, they always end up being more problems than they're worth. Or others of you might do the pros and cons. Well, the advantages of a new car is you've got your 3-year to 5-year warranty. You've got that new car feeling. You've got reliability. The disadvantage is when you drive out, you lose about $4,000 or $5,000 straight away. Then you might go into the pros and cons of a second-hand car and then weigh up the evidence and say, so, you know, my view is that the advantages of a new car, you know, far outweigh the disadvantages. I'd always recommend you get a brand new car. Pros and cons. You know the information. You've been working on the project, but you haven't been asked this specific question. Use your pros and cons. Backup model number 6, problem, cause, solution. Those of you who have staff working for you, and I know there are some people on the webinar that have staff working for them, don't you love it when a staff member comes to you and says, look, Peter, I've noticed that there's a problem. I've worked out that this is what's causing it, and I've got a couple of suggestions that I think will solve it. I just need your approval to go ahead and do that. As opposed to a worker, a subordinate that comes to you and says, look, Peter, here's a problem. I've got a problem. You need to solve it. I don't know what to do. So problem, cause, solution is a great way to unpack when you're put on the spot. An example would be someone that came to you and said, look, I've just noticed that we've completely ran out of the A4 photocopier paper, and we need to print some more. We need to print the minutes of the next meeting. The cause of the problem is that workshop we ran last week. We had to print, 100 workbooks of 50 pages each, and we just completely ran out of paper, or that exhausted our stocks. I've been in contact with Officeworks, and they can have 3 cartons of photocopier paper here within the next half hour. All I need is your approval to go ahead and proceed. Problem, cause, solution. Many of you out there will have iPhones. When the iPhone 4 was first brought out, the first of the iPhone 4s, it got a lot of negative publicity, and the negative publicity relates to the fact that some of the calls were dropping out. And Steve Jobs was at a press conference, and someone asked him the question that, the iPhone 4 is really bad. Aren't you going to recall all of them and start over again and scrap it? And Steve Jobs responded something like this. Well, the problem is no mobile phones are 100% perfect. All the mobile phones have one little problem in one way or another. The iPhone 4 has a 2% dropout rate. So about 2 in every 100 calls tends to drop out momentarily. Now, the cause of this problem, as you know, the iPhone 4 is a very innovative device, and the aerial we've wrapped around the edge of the case, and there's a little gap so that the aerial works. And what people are doing is when they pick up the phone in their left hand, they're putting their finger over the gap which closes the circuit and creates an electromagnetic field. As you know, when you create an electromagnetic field, radio signals do not penetrate all that well. The solution is we've provided this free case that you can download that protects the aerial, or hold the telephone in your right hand and the signal will not drop out. Now, I probably didn't do Steve Jobs justice in that response, but the problem was the response to that challenge from the press was regarded as one of the best responses they'd heard. The sales of iPhone 4s did not suffer. People started to be aware of it, move their thumbs so they don't close the gap, and there was no negative publicity as a result of Steve Jobs' response to that heckling, I guess, around the iPhone 4 that was not perfect. No phone's perfect. All phones have little problems, little glitches. The cause of our problem is because we try to be a little bit innovative and incorporate the aerial in the case. Solution's quite simple. Problem, cause, solution. Backup model 7. Look at things, how they affect you, how they affect others, how they affect globally. This is the zoom in, the zoom out. How things affect globally. That's the helicopter view, so you're hovering above. When you drill right down how it affects you, that's the microscopic view. So if we were to shed a couple of part-time staff, well, how it affects me? Well, personally, I know that I'll still be able to do my job and I'll be really quite effective in my job. I've been doing my job for a long time. How it affects the workers? There's going to be a concern with worker morale. We're going to have to do the managed changement really quite well, but I don't think that's insurmountable. How it affects our clients? Well, the clients are going to suffer significantly. Our ability to deliver home and community services, Meals on Wheels, nursing services in the home are going to completely be obliterated. And from that, I know these clients, they're going to suffer. They're going to write to their ministers for health. They're also going to write to the newspaper, and there's going to be a lot of negative publicity. So on the basis of how it's going to affect our end users, I don't think we should shed part-time staff. I don't think we can afford to reduce services to that client group. Self, others global, this could be how it affects the Shire of Manjimup, the Shire of Busselton or the City of Busselton, how it affects the state of West Australia, how it affects the nation of Australia. What's your view on the new mining tax, the minerals royalties rent tax? I guess for myself it doesn't really concern me all that much. As a parochial West Australian, I know it's a federal government grab to try and take some of West Australia's wealths, some of West Australia's minerals and resources, and spend it on the rest of Australia. Some of those states that are not doing all that well, and as a West Australia, a parochial West Australia, I think it's unfair that our wealth and our money from our minerals and resources are being stripped off us to prop up the rest of Australia. Taking a global view, as an Australian, and Australia is a federation, I guess it's fair that we do distribute the nation's wealth in a way so that all Australians, wherever they are, can equally, enjoy, the great nation we have. So when I put on my national cap, maybe it's not such a bad idea that the mining tax does distribute wealth equally, and maybe in the future when mining has a downturn and West Australia is struggling and other states' manufacturing kicks in and other IT services start to increase the wealth, I'm sure that wealth will then flow to West Australia like it has done at the moment. Different point of view by looking at it from different points. A different final conclusion. So as you go through these things, this is just how you identify your point of view. I wasn't sure what I was going to say then, and this is a national webinar. I've got people everywhere. So if I end with my parochial view that West Australians, it's ours, we should keep it, that might not be the right answer for the group I'm speaking to. So as I unpack it and go to a national level, I understand that as a federation, this is the way we work. And I would support the distribution of the nation's wealth equally amongst all states. This might be how it affects West Australia, how it affects Australia, how it affects the world. So it's not actually the globe, the world all the time, unless you want to zoom out to that level. So you choose 3 concentric circles, zoom in, then take a step back from another point of view, and then take more of a helicopter view. Backup model number 8, the SAO biscuit, the situation, the action, the outcome. This model is very good for job interviews. Can you give me an example of when you've used your interpersonal skills to resolve a conflict in the workplace? Well, the situation was I had 2 workers that weren't getting on well, and I noticed that productivity was going down, and both of them had come to me and complained about each other. So the situation, you paint the picture. The action that I took was that I took them aside one by one and spoke to them and found out exactly what was happening, what their complaints were, what the concern was. I then brought them in together, and I reminded them of their workplace policies, their operational guidelines, and what's expected of them in the workplace. I got them to agree that they would stop this, this bullying to each other, and also got this in writing. And I also pointed out that if it continued, I may have to take some form of disciplinary action. The outcome was that both agreed that they weren't behaving well, and they recognised that they don't have to be best of friends to work together, and the outcome is 6 months later they're still working together within the department, and there's been no further incidences. Or the outcome was that this was just not reconcilable, so person A has been asked to be moved to another department, and we've moved person A to another department, and all reports everything is going well. Person B has stayed and their productivity has increased immensely. The situation, the action, the outcome. Back up Model 9, traffic lights. Stop doing some things, start doing more, and do more of this. Someone pointed out that these could be the wrong way around. This yellow can be orange. It doesn't really matter. That maybe the orange should be do more and the green should be start. So stop, start, and do more. It doesn't matter. So if something's happening at work, or you're asked by your boss, we've got this problem and I'm just not quite sure how we should solve it, productivity's down, or absenteeism's up, or our meetings are going on for an hour and a half, and there should be 1 hour meetings, but I notice they're going on for an hour. What we need to do is we need to stop allowing people to bring in issues that are not related to the agenda. What we need to start doing is we need to start putting time limits on how long each person responds, and what we need to do is we need to let everybody know that the agenda is what we speak to, and if it's not on the agenda, then we don't speak about it. Probably not a very good example. We need to get rid of this. We need to start to do more of this, and we need to bring on board this. I'm going to pause for a moment, see if there's any questions. Anyone wants to type in a question, put your hand up if I'll open up your microphone. Webinars work better when there's interaction from the people out there. Thanks, Guy. So when you're given a topic, do you collate all the information? How do you collate all the information in such a short time? And how do you get all the structure clear in your mind? The structure, I've got the structure anchored. So I'm going to start by saying a little bit of, that's a really good question. There's a number of ways I can answer that. And then I'm going to list some of the points that I have, and if I've got a lot of information, I'll probably just say 3 things, and I'll go to 3 bits of information, and then I will wrap it up by letting someone know what my point of view is. Now, with these models, you're not going to use all of them at the same time. You're not going to remember all of them, so do recognize that. As you look at them, there will be 3 or 4 models that work really well with you. Which ones work best for you? For me, pros and cons is a no-brainer. If I've got a lot of information and general knowledge on a topic, but I haven't formed an opinion, I will go through the pros and cons. What you'll notice is what I know, or state your point of view, the reason, the explanation, point of view. These are models you can use if, when asked a question or asked to speak on a topic, you've got the information and a point of view ready to go. If you don't know a point of view, but you've got information, and if I did ask each of you, and you should have a point of view on nuclear energy, because it was in the West Australian newspaper just earlier this week, and we are a nation that mines uranium, so you know a little bit about it. Maybe it doesn't interest you, but if someone asks you what's your point of view on nuclear energy, you should be able to come up with a logical response. And you might say, well, first of all, I know the advantages are such and such, then I know the disadvantages, and then you form your opinion. Just to say, look, I don't support nuclear energy, I'm green and I'm anti-nuclear energy, that's not a very structured approach. So I would always use one of these models to anchor the information. If even straight away, the first thing that comes to my mind, I'm against nuclear energy. I don't support nuclear energy. When your boss calls you in and wants a response, for you to just say, no, I don't agree with that, that's not good enough. You need to unpack it. So it's about working out which models work best for you. These models are good when you know your stuff and you know your point of view and you just want to put it in a little structure. These ones are better when you need to unpack and form an opinion. This one's good for job interviews. This one's good for looking at, I guess, situations where you need to look at it from different points of view. So you can give your answer, but it might be selfish. Or you could give your answer that might be ideal for the team, but from an organisational point of view, you need to zoom out. I've been asked another question. Whoops. And the question, do you use a pen and paper to note down points as you go? Are you to remind yourself of points you want to cover? No, I don't. Thinking and speaking off the cuff is the ability to be able to respond immediately when someone asks you a question. So you've just delivered a presentation, you're in front of the audience, then you need to respond to that question. You can't do pen and paper. Certainly I know at job interviews nowadays, sometimes they're giving you 10 minutes time before the job interview to read the questions. When you read the questions, you can take notes down and you can bring it in. It's about thinking on your feet and responding, and it's about responding and trying to keep it concise without the need for notes. With the three things, does it help to remember them if they're related in the same way? Not really, because you don't know what three things are going to surface as you're speaking. You've got a lot of information about nuclear energy. Someone asks your point of view and you say, well, I could talk on this all day. I'm going to keep it concise. I'm going to mention three things. The first thing that will come to your mind, so there's three things I know about nuclear energy. The first thing that's going to come to your mind is the one that's the prominent point that you know. So you're going to start with that. While you say that point, the second point will come. And then from the three or four other things you have in your mind, you will have now worked out which is going to be your third point. So the 3 points will anchor you to a short, sharp presentation. The three things, if you want them nice and related, or yes, certainly in related, they need to support your point of view. If your point of view is, I'm against nuclear energy, and you give 2 points for and 1 point against, that doesn't make sense. So they need to be of the, each point needs to add evidence. Each point needs to support what your final end strongly take-home message is. Really nice if they're related and linked. When you prepare a speech, you might write down 3 things and you'll make sure that your 3 points are very closely related, but off the cuff, sometimes they're not that well related. And after you've done the three things, you can then end strongly. If you do have a fourth thing that is even stronger than maybe the points you've mentioned so far, bring that fourth point in, but then go back and sum up once again. Okay. Thank you for those questions. Now, so don't learn all 9 models. Really hard to try and memorize those 9 models. Pros and cons, what I know, I use past, present and future quite a bit, and 3 things. When I'm in a job interview, I know that I need to, and this Self Others Global gives you the behavioural based job interview response that they're looking for more and more, as opposed to, you know, that theoretical or that hypothetical how you would behave in a job. So what I'd ask you to do, and I did say at the start of the webinar, I'd like you to go away with a couple of things. From what you've heard today about thinking and speaking off the cuff, write down a few things that you think you could do differently when you go to the next job interview, when someone at a meeting says, you know, what's your point of view, Simon? And then work out, pick the 2 that you can do most effectively, that you can do with the least amount of, I guess, time. Focus on those for the next 6 months, next 3 months, the next 12 weeks. It takes about 12 weeks to embed a new skill, a new learning. So don't say, oh, I've got 10 things I've learned today, I'm going to do all 10 of them. That's really hard. Do your 2, and then you can pick another 2 in another 12 weeks' time, in another 3 months. That's the best way to embed your learning. From my workshops, from my webinars, pick up the 2, the nuggets that you think, well, I get that. I don't have to go into answers straight away. I'm going to practice buying time. I'm not going to be afraid of that really long pause. I'm going to learn to paraphrase the question back. And while I'm paraphrasing, I'm going to organise my thoughts. And one thing, the second thing you might say is, one thing I notice is when I do speak off the cuff, I don't end strongly. With job interviews, so many times people say, if I go back to the interpersonal conflict, they say, look, I had 2 people that were fighting and they were sort of bullying and teasing. I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this, and I did this. And then they stopped talking. But what happened? What was the outcome? So you need to end strongly. You need to let us know what your point of view is at the end. I'm going to wrap up there. We're getting towards 10 o'clock West Australia time. I've got a couple of webinars coming up, a couple of workshops in Perth. I was in Melbourne last week and that workshop went well. 28th is winning presentations. 8th of October is thinking and speaking off the cuff. So it's this in a workshop environment, practicing the skills and having a good go. Some questions from Sky. Let's say you're on a game show and I give you 1 minute to tell me about monkeys. Do you do your collation of the speech out loud so we can hear? Monkeys. 1 minute to tell me about monkeys. Monkeys are one of the most wonderful animals in the world. The reason they're one of the most wonderful animals in the world is because much of what mankind enjoys today is as a result of monkeys. A lot of our drugs, a lot of our surgery, a lot of our vaccines are tried on monkeys first. So without the humble monkey, mankind wouldn't be able to enjoy the vaccines, the health, the well-being that they do now. Man goes into space, they put a monkey there first. So I've got to sum up now, Sky. So I think monkeys are one of the most wonderful creatures on this earth, and they've been a great help to mankind. I've got another comment, and some people are leaving now, and I understand, that's fine. From your original full-day seminar, so someone's attended my seminar, they're doing a lot of presentations, and they've used many of the techniques to good effect, and they've had much improved feedback from the audience. Thank you for that. I've got a couple of thank yous. What model did you use to tackle this challenge? Just what I know. I'm a medical scientist by background, and I know that that in the past, less so now, in the past monkeys were the guinea pigs, I guess. Now they tend to use more mice and rats, but so what I know. As a medical scientist, I knew the background of monkeys, and then as I was talking about vaccines and the drugs that we trial on monkeys before trying on humans, I remembered that monkeys also went into space before they put man into space, so that was another point that I wove in. Okay, webinar there. No more questions. Time is finished. Any further questions, please email me and I'll get back to you. And please do something different the next time you are asked to speak. Respond without notice. Thanks, everyone.